is made possible by a grant from, it sounds like a commercial. Bringing you,
Brought to you by.
Mellon, a grant from Mellon to LASA, and I don't know whether, you know, the larger thing would be something that we could talk to Mellon about. I don't know if it's the kind of thing that Mellon funds, frankly. I don't know enough about Mellon. Does anybody in the room know anything about Mellon?
They require,
They ask you.
They don't receive,
Right.
they don't receive applications, you have to be kind of, you have to go through your government,
Yeah.
your university kind of hierarchy, you eventually get invited to apply.
That's right.
And so it would be a process, but it's possible.
We've had good luck. We have had, UMass has had money from Mellon for various kinds of things. The Center for Teaching. Those things. Right. Any other thoughts? Barbara?
I'm a political theorist. I don't know anything about funding. I'm all in for whatever's coming, and I'm happy to write grants and things like that, but imagining how to structure the next step, I admit I'm completely blown by it. So I'm following the lead of our
Well, you know, whatever we do, Charlie was, you know, while appreciative of our continuing to take the lead, I think that there are lots of funding agencies out there who are enamored of interinstitutional.
It's recorded now. Am I in the frame?
So that, you know, it will, I got into trouble with UMass for not having, anyway, for not doing the collaboration with you. I'm telling LASA that UNC and UT were collaborators on this, but it'll be part of my report, and I didn't do it right through OGCA because it was a teeny grant and it really didn't seem to make sense to have to do that. But I do think that one of the things I'd like to see going forward, and we could expand potentially the number of institutions present here, like we could again partner with, just behind you, right? We could again partner with our Peruvian friends. Maybe we could partner with Mika again, and you know, keep UNC and UT in the loop. I don't know whether, where's the other Jeff? You know, I mean, it may be that those are the kinds of things that it may make it harder to write the grant as I say that, but on the other hand, I think it's one of the things that they look to. And, you know, the previous collaborative project that Mikal and Rafael and Jeff and Millie and Agustin and various of us participated in, had the idea of constituent member institutions that in the end that didn't work terribly well. But it would be interesting to think about rotating events, like Jeff, if you could organize, you know, it could be smaller scale. Maybe, I think what Charlie was suggesting is that it need to be something where you know, you have to fund everybody to come. And a lot of people are here on their own dime in any case. So, you know, we could fund things that are more on people's own dime, you know, take a bus to Boston kind of thing, or whatever, yeah.
Did you put yet? We have friends.
This might make it more difficult to manage, but it might make sense to think about a couple of sites in Europe. Like now it's Steven. There's money the European Union, the Scandinavia, And they really like institutional partnerships with American US universities.
And we have a Dutch expat here, who knows all of you?
Yeah, I guess Holland too much.
I have a question, just to build on something you said. It seems like, and I may be wrong, but it seems like the network so far has been, lots of people doing their own research, sometimes together with others, but often on their own, coming together and kind of sharing the research. Has there been talk about actually a research, kind of a new or sort of differentiated research initiative coming out of these discussions? That's a different kind of grant, it's different temporality, but it could be a point where
Yep.
people want to work on something that they're not already working on, but they would advance the conversation.
Yep. And I think that is a different temporality though. I wonder, it might take us,
Yeah.
one of the things I've learned also over years of collaborating is that collaboration takes a really long time. But it may well be that as we look for, I think what we need, and this is maybe where Vilas could help, is to try and identify potential funding sources for various thinking, okay, and then just put to the group, who's up for doing that, if we could if maybe continuing to think about a conference grant is not the most productive thing, and that we could move to the focused research question. I'd be delighted. I very much want to do something with what's going on in Brazil. I did do this last time, but it was like on the side as I was doing my stuff on side streaming feminine, and I did it, a considerable amount of things with Laura's help and other people's help. So I'd be delighted to have, a pointed set of questions that were a shared set of questions as I did that. That would be one model. Jeff?
Just to share where I am, for what it's worth. But in terms of like the publishing, I think that Charlie's idea of sort of several projects around sort of dimensions would be good. I sort of wrote my Occupy stuff a couple of years ago and haven't really been working on it, so I'm doing other kinds of things. But some people have been talking about events and evental situations and insurgencies and subjectivity. That's part of what I'm writing a chapter in my new book. So I'd be up for that. And if it's pushed down the road, even better. Because I kind of want to finish this book next year. I'm on sabbatical. Likewise, if there's a research project, as long as it doesn't start until after next year, I'm looking for a new project. So, that would be great. So that's where I am. And Northeastern, I could sort of, try to bring in our institution. Again, it's not a lead institution, but they're trying to up their, research profile. So they might be happy to have me try to.
Everybody wants a institution.
Yeah.
Right.
Just because Jeff just did a thing, and I'm not saying that everyone wants to go around and stay where they're at, but that might not be a bad idea, but are we gonna do what people are saying? Are we still in the breaks? Okay.
Thank you. I stopped. Okay, so, but sounds like we've gone as far as we are going to go on that subject. Maybe we can return to it in the end. You'll be hearing from us. I guess. But it really would be important to be able to, even for purposes of internal representation for us. I know whether Drexel is in place or Barbara, but even for internal representation, if we could say, we have all these various institutions that are involved or interested in being involved in this project. That gets us a little bit of more attention around here, yeah.
Yeah, no, I would, it would be really exciting to bring along the UC school, since there's, not to add a bunch of people to the group, but, jumping around a lot, but there's several interesting institutions that can be brought along at UC, including UC Humanities, Institute, which could do a summer workshop, which is a 10-day thing. And,
That's a beautiful idea.
That's a really great place. That's at Irvine, that's not in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara has Global Studies
Yeah, that's the
Center.
only problem.
Yeah, and Santa Barbara has, kind of one of the best sociology programs interested in social movements and things like that. So that would be really interesting. So yeah, I'll think about that and if we want to work maybe because UC can apply for partner grants with UC, which is bigger than the sum of the parts. So
Did you do a UC Irvine? Was your seminar UC Irvine?
No,
Humanities
it
Institute of
wasn't,
Irvine?
it wasn't London, and it was at David. It was voluntary. But yeah, the Humanities Institute is something that we could think about what we can do.
yeah.
Explain to people who don't know the Humanities Institute how that works.
Is it still David Field Goldberg?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's UC, there are certain
Just that
institutions
one,
that are
so it's full.
UCY, which means they pool funding, although they have we have the Center for New Racial Studies at Santa Barbara, which isn't as large as HRI. The Humanities Research Center in Irvine is campus-wide and has enough funding to host large, even about this size, maybe a little bit larger in there, usually like 2-week summer intensive seminars, and they give you housing in the glamorous bunny-ridden campus of Irvine. The only wildlife in Irvine are bunnies for some reason. But it's a great environment, and it's interdisciplinary. It's humanistic social science, and kind of right down in the middle. And they they have quarter-long, but I think
Residencies.
that's only for UC and maybe 1 or 2
Right.
but the seminars are international affairs, which bring people from all over, so we can be a constituent group, like that one every year on secularism and politics, which brings people from all over Middle East, South Asia. So maybe you and I, we can work on some of the things like that, and then but one other idea, which is separate from the location, is that maybe we do, if this continues, do like an encounter in which we focus on a particular set of conflicts, and we all, or many of us who are interested, go and really immerse ourselves in a very particular case, just an idea.
Rio de Janeiro.
Like Rio de Janeiro, or Bahia, or in. But the point being that there's something productive to everyone really getting deep into. Not that we all have to research on that, but just as that becomes like one day of the conference where we're immersed in meeting with lots of social movements, different kinds of state actors, historians, and we go to places and visit them, and all these things are absorbed, go to do one in
That's a
Tahrir
great
Square, blah, blah. And then have that a full day so that we can all have come at it from different angles, and then we can have another day where we do meta or separate work.
Another place that like that that would enable us to bring in more Europeans and people from MENA and so on would be the Rockefeller. Rockefeller Center, what's it called? Bellagio, of course. Bellagio, although, I'm not a big fan of Bellagio, but they too can, that too is a space where, the thing about it is that if you run I've always thought that it was a ridiculous place to run a meeting with mostly people from the Americas. If most of the people are coming from the Americas, then they have to, they have to pay their way. It's very hard to get money to get there. They fund people from the Global South, though, right?
Exactly.
Is that the way it works?
Yeah.
For those meetings. I've been to them before, and I've had funding to go there, but anyway, that's another.
We could all fly there from Rio.
And it would be impressive.
The wretched of the earth.
Barbara liked this idea. Anyway, there are obviously lots of different creative formats, but I guess the spirit is that the conversation should continue. I'm somewhat reluctant to do this kind of a format again, though. I think we may have exhausted the large general meeting to talk about large general questions, to my mind. So, it might be interesting as Charlie suggested, to have a focus conference on the rethinking the transnational only. And some 3 questions on rethinking the transnational in the light of this set of problematics. I don't think, I think it was important to have this, a follow-up to the April 2013. And also, we got the LASA money. I mean, it was like, that's, what is it, the cart pulling the horse or something, is that the expression in English? So it was the cart, we might not have had this meeting now were it not for the fact that I thought, Jeff got one of these, they're not, they're nice little grants that are enabling. So that's my suggestion, that this be the last of our, so what are we talking about?
As exciting as that is.
Yeah, no, really, I mean, it's just, they are big questions, and I think we're getting some, my sense is, after yesterday and just this morning, is that we're really getting somewhere with those questions, so that we're ready now to zero in on, is it struggle, is it, is it what's changed, what's different is the security state. We have a set of questions, by the way, but Martha was gonna say this at the beginning of the next session, we should move to the next session in a moment after you say what you're gonna say. But I wanted to point out that, we talked a lot about the police state and the security state and so on, and there is a whole, policing protest question. So if we could try to stay a bit more focused in this next conversation and zero in on the questions at hand, that would probably be useful in moving us along. Because
I don't know if this is but I just want to say that I'm not suggesting we do another conference like this, but I think the meta is useful partly because of the historical moment that we're in, and I do think that the question of protest and movement is on the public mind in a way that maybe it hasn't been. Time being protest. There are things, there are indicators, and then the other one. And this is one of the things that makes me, I said it at the end of the panel yesterday, but I was really, inspired and, activated and, learned a lot from the papers in a way that I haven't in a while. And I feel like there's something really neat about this group that is outside the dominant approach to studying social movements and protests that still dominate. But the problem is that they still dominate, right? So graduate students still have to read that canon, and they still, it's like the necessary point of passage, right? So my point is there's something to be said about naming what we're doing and unifying, calling it a different approach to social movements. That's not what it
sure.
Placeholder. Because there is that big hegemon that is still dominating the way so many people study these things. So just to put that out there.
Is that the common enemy? I don't know.
Actions against those enemies.
But it is a pretty intense enemy. I mean, in terms of the epistemology and in terms of even I don't know if you guys have read the interview with Zibecki in South Atlantic Quarterly when he talks about social movement studies, and in terms of its spatiality, it's I can send out the PDF, but it's just there is something really to that, the possession of how our imaginaries work and how the material funding goes to people that are doing that.
Yeah. Well, but I think there that it may be helpful in terms of our getting funding, since we're not done with CADM, and thank God, that it may be helpful in getting funding to be able to say we're not done with CADM.
Yes. And actually to identify that as part of what unites us, because it's necessary and important, especially given these historical times.
All right, so shall we move on and in the further interest of time, we're going to try and cut down the time of each of the next 2 sessions to around an hour each. We'll see how that works. We'll see how that works. But it went really well. I mean, I think part of the reason I think that's possible, Rafa, is because I think we touched on a lot of things that were part of the next 2 questions in the first question, in the first set of questions. So, who are our facilitators? Who's gonna start? You? Back to my note-taking. So,
Okay, I'm gonna begin with, I'm gonna refer to each of the questions that we have in the program for this second panel. And I'm gonna give some comments based on what I have observed and what I have read in the papers. But of course, I cannot be comprehensive, so I apologize if I'm not including everyone. I also apologize if I'm talking about things that happened this morning because I had to go through a little bit. So, the first question that we had for this session is, what is the role of transnational communications and diffusion in the strategies and tactics of recent protests, and how are such networks built? And some of the things that I could identify in the papers and the presentations was that while forms of communication are certainly important, the focus of that many people have in mind has not necessarily been on the transnational diffusion of protests. And so, like, even though we have identified these like dominant narratives of contagion and protest, like the work that people are doing in this group is not necessarily reflecting or speaking to them. So protest as an epidemic has been less of a concern, which does not mean that people have not been attentive to communication as formed, as in the case of feminist bloggers in Zakia Salim's paper, which invites questions of how to unsettle a patriarchal model of respectability, as we said yesterday, and about the possible sides of mobilization that transcend the politicality of public space as usual and its exclusions. So I think that questions of communication are certainly present, and maybe invite us to think about space in a broader sense, like not necessarily reduced to this narrative of transnational diffusion. In regards to the second question, what are their normative strategies and tactics, and to what extent are they shared? And we've certainly talked about innovative strategies, although innovations are not necessarily in the strategies and tactics, but in their uses and those who use them. So I want to recall Paul Amar's analysis of children as laborers and as political actors using Bob Sponge. And what is novel here is not labor, is not economic grievance, is not age, is not pop culture and activism, but how they appear together in very peculiar assemblages. In the case of Julie Henman's analysis of Nashi, we find something perhaps not novel, but counterintuitive, which is in the form of how the state appropriates protest repertoires, as well as the paradox that she invites us to look at of how there is this use of the toolkit, what she calls the toolkit of pro-democracy international interventions, and how it is deployed through technologies of occupation of the street that hinder more challenging forms of occupation of public space. In regards to the third question, what is the relationship between activists or civil society organizations or organization practitioners, whether transnational or local, analysis of the movements in which they partake and prevailing social science explanations? So with respect to this question, I would like to invite more discussion about something that Paul Amar said yesterday. I have in my notes a statement along the lines of social movements make gross mistakes in reading themselves. And maybe we can put this in conversation with the critique of what success means in earlier interventions that we had, for example, in the previous conference in message training, like challenges to the notion of success in social movement and in protest. Or with Marisol de la Cadena's layered theoretical methodology and politics of translation, which I think does speak to questions of transnationalism, translocality, and intralocality, particularly since questions of translation are not about the between, as you said yesterday, but about the within as when you responded to the question that was posed. Another relevant discussion that speaks to my own research interests would be how we may focus on what social sciences, we have focused on what social sciences have to say about protest and how activists define their own actions. But what things are we missing, I'm asking, what things are we missing when the main aspect of that we focus on when we think about agency is voice. So we're thinking about what the social sciences say, and perhaps with the provoking statement of Colomar from yesterday, what movements have to say about themselves, and we can speak about accuracy and things. But we are focusing maybe too much on voice and conflating agency with voice. This is like a new project I'm trying to work on, so I'm very interested in this question. So what other aspects of agency and knowledge production can we consider? So just as with Marisol de la Cadena's paper that invites us to think about agency besides humans, and that is in earth beings, how can we deconflate agency with both? Another paper that speaks to this concern is Elba Orozco's, whose research focus is on the seeming disappearance of protest when human voices are not heard. But objects begin to have agency and other human senses become more full of agency, like the sight or the capacity to listen. The fourth question. Much has been said, much has been made of the role of social media, but how has its use varied across the diverse protests of this current way? So here, besides Zakia Salim's analysis of feminist bloggers, we could bring back earlier discussions about the relationship between certain technologies of communication and certain protest cultures, and I'm thinking about Jeff Jury's work. And we could think also about these relations with the new questions that people are asking, like Stellan's concern with the effectiveness of protest and multiple ranges of such effectiveness. And I'm also thinking of that intervention yesterday about what success means and how many ranges of meaning that can have. Lastly, coming back to the question of transnationalism, which is the broad term that has this session. Perhaps one of the concepts that most keeps appearing in the presentations of yesterday and the papers is that of the nation state. More than an explicit focus on the transnational diffusion of protest, repertoires and practices across national boundaries, participants offer empirically grounded insights about how protest travels the nation and the state, and how political learning on the part of the state is in constant catching up through processes of domestication, repression, and appropriation of protest innovations, which in themselves involve questions of transnationality. So even though Sonia is asking us to not focus on the securitization stuff and these responses of the state to protests, I think that part of this conversation, as Kevin also said before, is how is not only protest is transnational, but also policing and securitization and all that. So here it seems to me that transnationalism can be a fruitful lens that does not take the nation for granted, but keeps questioning it and its complicities with imperialism and neoliberalism. And I'll leave it there.
Okay. So, okay, so I guess I'm next here. Martha was much more disciplined than I. Although I started out trying to do that, I stuck with it. But what happened was, I was going through the papers. I'm gonna say I gotta go through the papers and then formulate my comments. And I got through Stellan's and I think yours was next, right?
I don't know.
And then I'd already had 7 points that I wanted to. And so I think what I'm focusing on here is the third question, and also Marta's, who's very important in his thinking. What is the relationship between activists and practitioners? And so I have. It's actually the last point, or the last two that I really want to emphasize. So if I start going on, you just tell me and I'll jump to the last
Someone has to
so
control.
someone needs to control it. So all this is predicated on what I saw as a really central focus of this discussion, at least the one that really impacted me most, which is present in the previous one and in general, but I think really came to the fore here, which is the critique of realist politics, the opening to other distinct temporalities, forms of practice, constructions of the world, really rethinking what it means to be politics, and that one of the code words is this ontological turn, as Arturo calls it, or really thinking beyond the social science and mainstream social science categories that we've inherited. And I see that as an analytical project and definitely as a politics as well. And I think that's what I find so compelling, is that we need kind of creative, critical, transformative political ideas. So and I think Martha's idea, this encounter of multiple spatio-temporalities as a way of rethinking 132, I thought was very engaging right along those lines. So what these are is questions that kind of follow from that. That is what I saw as sort of a central theme, that people came out from very different directions, and not everyone did, but I think most people were in that dialogue. The first has to do with legibility. The panel just before Marisol's was all about making these alternative expressions of politics legible. I think that was sort of echoed this morning. And I was just thinking, legibility. And then Marisol kind of did a little different move on this. It was much more about, I don't want to necessarily say what these earth beings are about. So let's leave it a little bit, kind of someone else to do the legibility move. So I was kind of thinking about legibility and recognition are close cousins. And so what is this? What's at stake in the drive to make these politics legible? Because that's kind of also a project with which we might not identify. So how do we confront that dilemma? The second was actually the question of racial terror, which I pretty much said already this morning what I wanted to say. That I think that the ontology debate gets complicated by what John was trying to say in his paper. I won't repeat that. The third is this again, and I'm going to use Marisol's image here of the two. I like a lot the election and the kind of the radically other form of politics, kind of side by side, and Don Nazario sort of instructing her and others that we got to do both. We don't have the luxury of not engaging, and yet we also are doing something different. I feel like that theme came up again and again, at least in my reading of the papers, and I feel very under-theorized as a kind of what does that look like? What are the tools that we have to sort of? I mean, I get the phrases, more than one, less than two, or whatever, but I don't see the analytics kind of there fully developed, and I think. It's also the question about our institutions, the institutions that we inhabit, because we're doing this in all kinds of ways and all kinds of levels, and I feel like there's a deep need to sort of keep hegemony and domination at the center of our analysis, while also doing we're also doing this kind of hybrid or conjugated analysis, and I feel like there's a lot more that we could be talking about there. And that there's a sense in which this, while totally getting the kind of the critique of success failure, part of that analytics for me is also figuring out doing some kind of ethnographic analytical approach to the differential creative aftermaths of what results from the aftermaths of what realists might call tactical defeat through repression, because I don't think we can say that we're always seeing all this creative production of alternative worlds happening. Sometimes we are, and sometimes maybe we're seeing kind of devastating results of repression. I want to see the differential ethnographic kind of possibilities there laid out. And that brings me to what Raphael raised, and Arturo emphasized, and I totally agree, that extractivism is really the motor, at least in Latin America, of a new regime of governance that's so fundamental to kind of come to terms with analytically. I don't know whether the ontological turn provides new tools for analyzing the dominant. And I get the critique, but I don't know if there's, and if not, then what are the tools for figuring out, Rob made a really nice intervention this morning about the security state. Paul's work is very much on that. So how do we keep that project kind of front and center? So now on to the last two. I think, I feel like one of the things that I would love to see this group do more of is analyzing how we, focusing the lens methodologically on how we do decolonize research, given the fact that we're positioning ourselves in this space. How does it transform the way we do research? Because a lot of times the results end up being very recognizable in an academic form. We're all doing, critique and empirical this and that, but we're actually engaging in the production knowledge, I think, in very, very different ways. But we don't talk much about that, and I feel like is it dialogue with activists? Is it a whole different way? Is it a different epistemology? Or is it simply, kind of research as usual and then, critical interventions? I don't think it is, but I don't feel like we've really come to terms with that. And that also brings me to institutional change, because I feel like these same problems bring us back to how do we create spaces in places like UMass for this kind of dialogue to happen? And how do graduate students demand, legitimacy for activist research? And then we're right back to Don Nasario's dilemma, because one of the ways we do it is by making sure that the research looks like environmental conservation and not like other worlds, or not. But I think that's kind of a really crucial strategic question around is our activist research kind of on the down low, and then in the academy we're sort of Joe Professor as normal, or are we really affecting institutional change in the universities? And if so, what are the strategies for that? And finally, I feel like it was brought up again this morning. We have this major unresolved tension between the topic of protest and our politics. And many people have brought up, Julie's ethnography, Evangelicals, Paul's focus on the middle class vigilantes, and so forth. So on social science grounds, it's completely justifiable to study the whole range and kind of define those pearls of sort of positive and insight, even in movements that seem the Tea Party reactionaries. But then there's also there's clearly a politics that unites us, or that at least discursively and we have Stalin saying we need to research that accelerates the civil disobedience in the name of liberation. Well, there you have it. Really out there, political. But Marisol's also is about, I think, a different kind of politics, but also it's not just about ethnography of protest movement to save Al Sangate. It's about our own collective, individual, and political commitments. So I have a sense, and I'm going to close with this, that tension between the topic and our politics could be worked out on methodological grounds, rather than. But I think in the university, it's very problematic to say, okay, this is this research network is about this politics, and you can do it, and you can fight those that disagree, but there's also I've been around enough to know that I don't want to be the one to actually define what our politics are. We're going to have all kinds of fights about that. They're productive, but also problematic. But there might be a way in which the methodological discussion could actually put this topic on the agenda in a more kind of from the ground up and productive way that wouldn't that would move us forward. That's all. Okay.
hi everybody. I'll be more brief and simple, I think. I'll just put some words out there. And I want to start with the word joy, humor, excitement in a very literal sense, pleasure. Okay, the pleasure of partaking in something public. So I think this is like when I try to think of all that we have talked about over the last 2 days. I think this is like, so how do I recognize the target moment as it? This might be, people collectively rediscovering the pleasure of partaking is, going out there and connecting with other people, with their bodies, with their thoughts, and doing something together, right? And this might be also like the common ground in the sense that, this is what the neoliberal civilization has been taking away from people, right? They will do things publicly, sharing public things. So this might be, in a way, what connects all these movements, whether they're anti-extractivist, pro-extractivist, whether they are confronting an authoritarian government, or more addressing more economic questions, this joy, this excitement of rediscovering what connects. So beyond those particular economic rationales of their particular articulations of neoliberalism in those locales, this might be what connects us, right? And so I came to this while trying to think about these innovative strategies and tactics and what the people on the ground have been doing and how they analyze, how they see what they're doing, right? So when I try to remember, for example, protests in Turkey, protests in Brazil, that's where I'm coming from, basically. I remember that people were they were having a lot of fun, right? So for them it was a lot of fun, and so humor was a very important tactic that they were using. It was very transgressive, it was very irreverent, and so it's kind of, going back to the discussion of the earlier morning, it brings to my mind the temporality of the carnival. If you remember, what medieval carnivals in Europe were about, they were turning the world upside down by becoming something else publicly, right? You wear a mask, and for a couple of days you pretend that the king is not the king, you're not a peasant, you're somebody else. Whatever your social role, whatever your sexual identity, all of that, it kind of turns upside down, right? And
have you been to Brazil for carnivals? Very similar to what you just described.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I think these protests had so much of the spirit of the carnival. And I know, for example, I have in mind this figure of the Turkish protest, a young woman who was using her breath as a gas mask. Just spontaneously improvising, without probably thinking a lot about it, but it's so irreverent and transgressive in so many different ways, right? So I think what I'm trying to say is I think we have been very serious about a lot of things. So we need to put this joy and humor, the excitement back in the center of all this, because I think that's what was going on the ground in many of these episodes. And I think we can think of social media as a place where this act of turning things upside down, but in that way, social media, we wear masks, right? When you go out, we have avatars, just like the carnival. But at the same time, kind of paradoxically, it's a place where you can be more easily public than you're accustomed to, right? It's a place where it connects with people, as Nokia used to say. It blurs these boundaries between the public and the private. So you more easily, people who have kind of forgotten how to come out and have this kind of party kind of collectivity because of the neoliberal transformations we have been experiencing. Social media kind of gives it back to us, right? So it might be, that might be connection. And so social media was also a place where all this humorous content was reproduced, and that was a very empowering and empowering tool. It is disarming a lot the social control apparatus, right? Yeah, so that's what I have to say. I mean, so just one last note. I think we can try to discover this element of joy, excitement, the adrenaline of going there and doing stuff, You can't see this in, like, for example, SpongeBob, right? Or you can't see this in, you know, okay, so this is what connects the LGBT groups going out there with the football club fans, right? So this feeling of like partying, like carnival, is like a festival of democracy. Everybody's there, everything is allowed for a moment, but it has its time. And maybe you know that time is going to end. You know, carnival always ends, and things go back to normal. But somehow we have transformed something there, right? Once we kind of turn things upside down for a moment, we never take it that seriously anymore, right? Even if we kind of go back. So yeah, that's it. I don't know.
I did it at the academy a long time ago.
Yeah, and so I apologize because I missed some of the discussion yesterday, but you know I look at the papers, and so I will offer you the comments based on what I saw there. And in particular, I thought that it was important the intervention, you know, in terms of thinking about technologies of protest or materiality of protest in general. If you think about, I mean, there was a question here for our exercise, more of, you know, technology in terms of social media or mediated type of communication or whatever. But, you know, in reading the papers, I thought that it was important, you know, that it was persuasive, the argument of looking at other type of the materiality of the protest, if you think in many different spaces, as a way to understand, if you want, the reconfiguration of power by the intervention of virtue of the existence and the protest in these spaces. And so I thought that, you know, talking about maybe mediation as rather than you know, like media technologies or material aspects, that mediation as is something that actually, yes, media studies proposes as a space to understand kind of the configuration of meaning, and in our case of the struggles of the political in these struggles, correct? So it's not about, yes, of course, social media was everywhere, and all the research said that, okay, it speeds the cycle of protest and all that, but what does it do in terms of really, is, I would say, creating those political spaces? That's the question, and it cannot be understood just by looking at one, you know, the use of the technology per se, but how it's interfaced, if you want to say, with other technologies. So I thought the technology being maybe the public space, the technology being, you know, the crosses and the, in Elias, in Eva school, yeah, I thought that this kind of thinking, and actually it's funny because she invokes the work of Marisol, and this kind of thinking is what makes me go back to kind of more kind of cultural production approach to look at these things, which is really the meaning that is constructed and the political meaning exactly, and the power that exists in the process of, you know, constructing the communication spaces, you know, and those communication spaces again are face-to-face interaction, mediated forms of communication, are just kind of the physicality of things. So is, you know, also in media studies, people have talked about like transmediation as a concept. I think that it's important to look at that literature as well, because it has something to say in those terms. And at the same time, I thought, by the way, Marshall, actually I also coincide, your paper helped me to kind of think about transnational in other way, in also not just as the translocal, correct? And in that sense, I have been thinking about really, you know, in this process of translation or mediation, the construction of place and local to local, it's like, well, you know, what exactly that means. But actually I thought that your paper was interested in those terms, like, you know, a more nuanced approach to say, well, it's not just kind of bringing things and appropriated them and deployed them for a particular reason. They actually are, you know, embedded in a in a force that is historical that pertains to the place. So in kind of our accounts, we have to be really careful, I believe, in terms of, you know, looking at some, in the comparison exercise, some similarities, but again, the historical aspect of how that force comes into, you know, events that are unfolding, correct? So I thought that that actually gave me a lot of perspective and helped me to think about how, you know, when we talk about, the appropriation of this strategy and how it's brought into this context, correct? And maybe just look at, not starting by looking at the strategy per se, but at the, you know, kind of the historical context in which it's appropriated. And that was helpful for me. The other part, I think that I was glad when I just arrived this morning to hear the connection with the state, because although I think it's something that, you know, and not just in terms of policing sometimes, but I also thought that in terms of, and not just kind of a policing or if you want the confrontation being direct, but I think that, you know, there is a presence that it has to be more kind of acknowledged in some of the work. In others, it's more evident. That is these larger frameworks of institutions, if you want the political economy of things, of that surround the protest, if you want. And in that sense, I always try to look at or interrogate what make it possible. What make it possible? What make Tahrir Square possible on the one hand? You know, like in the congregation of bodies that comes and really push back, right? And that part is like this aspect. The other thing, and I just want to finish with something, but there was no more discussion really, maybe, you know, good, that's not the problem. But on kind of social media created equal sometimes, so we talk about social media as, social media, and we really don't talk about kind of the groups behind social media uses. I mean, kind of more, I think that jurists have done that work on kind of the cultures of communication, I would say, or mediation within the movements. But even beyond that, if you think about how these networks are configuring are configured differently in each space, in each country, in each, you know, even the way how Facebook treated Egypt was very different from how it's treating Syria, correct? So it's very different from how it's, so that kind of context sometimes is really not there. So I say like, hey, remember the configuration of these tools, if you want, or these things actually are not tools, and institutions, and you know, they come, you know, with, so the takedown notices, by the way, I have been just looking at, you know, I'm from Venezuela, so SOS Venezuela versus kind of the counter protests online on that, and how, but you know, sometimes these groups have organized really savvy kind of ad hoc groups to play into the system of, you know, takedown and flags and so forth as a counter, as the information war goes on online, correct? So they're savvy and they know about, correct, these kind of configurations and play into the institutional aspect of the social media. In other words, it's not a tool, it's not a thing. It's just actually a company or a dynamic, you know, they're that with a user agreement that they want to understand and use for their purpose sometimes. So anyhow, so that was my only say, well, kind of the naturalization of these tools or treating media as a tool. But
Good.
that's what it says.
Good. Once again, we have a lot on the table. Why didn't I arbitrarily pick something to kick us off? No.
Can I talk for a couple minutes about Alfred's paper since I was assigned that, or
No.
is that too? I mean, just to build on. Or,
And
no.
I also want to respond.
Sure. Okay. Then I'm fine. If somebody wants to kick it off.
Taking
Who's moderating?
She's doing the stack. She's doing the stack. Yeah.
I'm not moderating, I'm stuck. Wait, did Paul, is that a?
Paul.
Paul might still.
So just because I think what you highlighted in terms of joy and the claiming of public sociabilities and the enactment of non-neoliberal kinds of collective subjects and all that, I think is a great way to bring us back into some of the more celebratory aspects that probably inspired this group in the beginning, the Tahrir moments. But I also want to underline, which I think is really important in your own paper and useful for us. In his paper, he traces the transnational and structural commonalities between the protests at Gezi Park in Istanbul and then the protests in Brazil in 2013, which happened right after, and which, you know, some people in Brazil referred to explicitly, just like people in Gezi Park referred to Cairo explicitly, and so these. But he doesn't just he does trace really interestingly the way that there was a transfer of imaginaries through certain social media, but he also does a really good job of basically theorizing the political economy and the social logic of a new middle class that comes out of these new emerging powers, quote unquote, boom countries, which is a story that's somewhat parallel to the story about extractivism and its social logics, but it's different because it's I don't understand yet, but I'm really interested in this profiling of the extractive logic of politics. But in these boom countries like Turkey, and now as you see, I think in Hong Kong, in Brazil, that are not so much extractivist based, or that are 1 degree removed. Brazil is hoping to be a major extractivist power at some time, but Faisal hasn't shown anything yet. But the boom countries invest heavily, as you're discussing, in this sometimes seemingly neoliberal set of subjects, but very state coordinated. In the case of Turkey, with a highly moralistic project which disseminates development through a handful of crony capitalists, right? Brazil, which has a social democratic distributionist model, but still distributes everything through Odebrecht, and like a handful of big companies that are cronies of the state as well. And so you talk about the way that both these successful boom emerging countries produce this middle class which is, as you talked about, highly in debt at the edge of collapse at all times, is highly socially segregated. The same projects that trickle down to create this middle class are also incredibly cronyist and exclude people from space in ways that, the old American dream middle class that got all these spaces and access to cities and suburbs. That's not the way that this new model works. So anyway, I thought what was useful for our project in general from his paper is that it brings us back to a kind of political and moral economy of a new middle class that's both some of the most dynamic and expressive actors making a claim to pleasure, but they're also some of the most insecure and raging because they're so at the edge. So they want pleasure, they want rights to the city, but if they don't get it, they're going to blame somebody else and hate them because they're so insecure, they're about on the edge. So they're all and heavy moralism and vengeful moralism is always there as a plan B. if they don't get with it. So this is tied into Jaime's suspicions of the white middle class protesters. I think we are carrying that through with a global political economy of these very animated, pleasure-seeking middle classes, but have a highly moralistic kind of not outrage, what is it? Sense of resentment, resentment, yeah.
Have you ever heard Marilena Chaui on the subject of the Brazilian middle class?
No, yeah.
Yeah, that is the one that.
Oh, there you are, John. Okay. Suspicions of these new middle class protesters.
Marilena Chaui. There's a like
Oh,
a
awesome, yeah, you
half
make
hour
my
if you
paper
don't
sound
speak
better than
Portuguese.
this.
It's great.
Yeah.
Just wish I knew about it a few months ago. We put it in the book we did on Brazil and Middle East. Next one, Michelle.
Just like to talk with Charlie about whether these ontological methodologies is useful to understand Youssef the dominant. And of course, I mean, all it does is ask what is, how is it, how does it enact itself? And you can use those questions for anything. And I was talking to Rafael today, but also with Arturo yesterday, about naming an idea that we're working with and trying to translate that idea into a proposal for a research project that is precisely about the ontology of corporations that are extracting in some places. And Rafael and I were talking about one mining effort, mining venture in central Peru, central South Peru, that was a mining effort to try to do it perfect, with really honest social responsibility, and it all went bad. So Rafael was telling me that would be the perfect site to look at what that corporation is, right? So yes, you can use it. It's just a matter of not knowing what it is and asking what it is and how it enacts itself. So for me, ontology more than anything else is starting from scratch. What is it? I don't know what a corporation is. So what is it? How does it enact itself there? Because the other thing is that it enacts itself in many ways in many different places, right? So that's a brief comment. And then the other thing that I was thinking, as Sonia and Charlie, both of you were talking, was I think that we have, or at least I imagine it as a word that can replace the notion of change. Because I too, like many of us, and I heard it from Martha too,